The blood of humanity's greatest warriors soaked the soil of planet Norax, painting the ground crimson as the corpses of Earth's most elite soldiers were torn apart and devoured by the savage claws and jagged teeth of the Norcadian predators they had woefully underestimated. When intel reached Earth Command about a race of vicious alien hunters terrorizing the Norax system, they immediately dispatched their top special forces unit, led by battle-hardened veteran Kyle Johnson, on a covert mission to assess the threat. But from the moment the squad's boots hit the scorched earth of Norax, nothing went according to plan. The toxic atmosphere choked their lungs. The searing heat blistered their skin even through their high-tech armor. Venomous creatures lurked in the shadows of the twisted jungles. But that was nothing compared to the Norcadians themselves. Renowned as the galaxy's apex predators, the Norcadians were hulking beasts with a skeletal structure and muscular system evolved for one purpose only: to rip prey to shreds. Impenetrable armor plates covered their bodies. Razor-sharp claws sprouted from powerful limbs that could slice a man in two. Yet their unrivaled lethality was more than physical. The Norcadians were cunning, ruthless, and lived only to kill. Every Norcadian from birth was shaped into a merciless hunter by their tyrannical leader Prylar. Kyle's squad came to Norax expecting to observe these creatures from a distance, but the Norcadians caught their scent immediately. In a whirlwind of blood, bullets, and shredded flesh, a brutal ambush in a narrow canyon left Kyle and his few remaining men fighting for their lives against a foe that outmatched them in every way. Conventional weapons barely scratched the Norcadians' thick hides. As night fell, the humans' dwindling chances of survival plummeted to zero as Prylar himself stalked into their wrecked encampment, backed by his most savage elites. What unfolded was a massacre of unrestrained savagery. Unstoppable talons raked through the humans' defenses, eviscerating all they touched. Soldiers were torn limb from limb, and their agonized death screams echoed through the blood-drenched night. Kyle unleashed all his battlefield fury and tenacity against Prylar in a desperate final stand. But even humanity's ultimate warrior was overwhelmed by the king of killers. As Prylar's claws wrapped around Kyle's neck, lifting his broken body like a ragged doll, he laughed in the human's face. These pitiful Terrans thought they could challenge the Norcadian dominion. Now Prylar would lead his legions to plunder Earth and grow fat on man-flesh. Just as Prylar's death blow swung to Kyle's throat, his lieutenant Mike jumped into its path. The talons meant for Kyle instead tore Mike's head cleanly off his shoulders, sending it spinning through the air in a spray of blood. Mike's sacrifice bought Kyle a single moment, but a moment was all he needed. Reaching for his last resort, an experimental plasma blade the Norcadian armor couldn't withstand, Kyle swung wildly at Prylar with strength he didn't know he still had. The sizzling blade slashed through Prylar's chest, carving through his organs and dropping him to the ground in a lifeless heap. As the mutilated remains of humanity's greatest soldiers lay strewn around him amidst their butchered alien foes, Kyle swore a blood oath. It didn't matter if it took a day or a decade, he would return, and he would not rest until every last Norcadian monster was wiped out. This fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. Kyle limped off the dropship back on Earth, clutching his side where a Norcadian claw had torn through his armor and carved a deep gash in his flesh. The wound burned like fire, but it was nothing compared to the ache in his heart for the men he'd lost on that hellish rock they called Norax. He pushed the pain down as he marched into the United Earth Defense Force Command Center, still covered in the blood and gore of battle. Admiral Briggs and the other UEDF brass looked up from their holomaps, their eyes widening at Kyle's haggard appearance. "Lieutenant Johnson, report," Briggs barked. "What the hell happened out there?" "Sir, we got slaughtered," Kyle said bluntly, smacking his head on the table. The Norcadian threat was worse than they'd ever imagined. He described the aliens' savage strength, lightning speed, and ruthless cunning. "Our weapons were almost useless. Their armor was too damn thick. We never stood a chance." Briggs leaned back, rubbing his chin. "You're telling me a bunch of dumb animals took out our most elite unit?" Kyle shook his head vehemently. "These things ain't just dumb animals, Admiral. They're smart, organized, and if we don't stop them now, They'll overrun the whole damn galaxy. Just then, alarms blared through the command center. Panicked reports poured in of Norcadian attacks across human space. Outposts overrun, colonies burning. The beasts were spreading like wildfire. Briggs pounded his fist. Those bastards think they can just waltz in and take what's ours. They've got another thing coming. He turned to Kyle. I'm authorizing a new initiative, codename Apex Hunter. We need men who know how these things think, who can take the fight to them. You're leading it, Lieutenant. Over the next days, Kyle pored over personnel files, handpicking the deadliest sharpshooters, demolition experts, and close combat specialists in the UEDF. But to beat the Norcadians, they needed more than guts and guns. They needed a keen scientific mind to unravel the secrets of their alien biology. That's when he found the file on Dr. Lena Sorensen, a fiery-haired civilian xenobiologist who'd written extensively on theoretical evolutionary paths of predatory species. Kyle had his doubts about bringing an untested civilian on a Black Ops military mission, but he couldn't deny her expertise. When Sorensen walked into the briefing room in her white lab coat amidst a sea of battle-hardened veterans, Kyle could feel the skepticism radiating off his men. But she quickly put any doubts to rest. The Norcadians aren't just brutes, she said, pulling up detailed anatomical scans. Their biology is built for the hunt, yes, but it's their sophisticated communication abilities that let them coordinate and adapt so efficiently. Disrupt that, and we can disorient them, weaken them. As Apex Hunter geared up for their first mission, the Norcadians struck again, this time invading Theron Prime, a vital human colony. Distress calls reported the alien predators dismantling planetary defenses effortlessly and rampaging through population centers, leaving piles of grisly remains in their wake. We need to go, now, Kyle snarled. Admiral Briggs concurred and ordered Apex Hunter to deploy immediately, evacuate any survivors and learn whatever they could about the invaders' tactics, no matter the consequences. Apex Hunter's dropships screamed into the skies over Theron Prime, and into pure hell. The once gleaming cityscape was a smoldering wasteland. Smoke choked the air and distant screams echoed from the rubble as the Norcadians hunted the last desperate humans. They're toying with them, Dr. Sorensen said grimly, analyzing the gory scenes magnified through her scope. Wearing them down psychologically before the kill. Not for long, Kyle growled, locking and loading. We're going in hot, buying time for the evac shuttles. Let's move out. Gunfire erupted from every direction as Kyle's team clashed with the Norcadian packs prowling the ruins. Bullets pinged harmlessly off the monsters' armored hides before scything claws and snapping jaws reduced men to bloody smears. In the midst of the melee, Dr. Sorensen crouched behind an overturned transport, frantically adjusting settings on a jury-rigged sonic emitter. Their communication frequencies. If I can just find the right modulation. A pack of snarling Norcadians encircled the scientist, drooling in anticipation. Suddenly, an ear-splitting shriek ripped through the air from Sorensen's device. The hunters lurched, grasping their heads in confusion and pain. In that instant of disruption, Kyle and his men cut them down in a hail of plasma fire. With the evac shuttles safely away, Apex Hunter fought their way to their own extraction point. Kyle hauled a wheezing Dr. Sorensen into the dropship as Norcadian blood sizzled on the barrels of his guns. Too many had fallen, but thanks to the doctor, they finally had a lead. As the ragged remnants of Apex Hunter broke atmosphere, Kyle collapsed against the hull, watching the ravaged colony recede through the viewports. The Norcadians thought the galaxy was theirs for the taking, but humanity would show them what it meant to be the hunters and the hunted. Back on the UEDF flagship, Dr. Sorensen hunched over her workstation, her eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. Holograms danced before her, displaying complex waveforms and spectral analyses. She rubbed her temples, fighting off exhaustion. "Eureka!" she shouted, startling the nearby technicians. "I've cracked it!" Kyle burst into the lab, his face grim. "Talk to me, Doc. What'd you find?" Sorensen's fingers flew across her console, pulling up 3D models of Norcadian brain structures. It's all here. The bastards use a hive mind, ultrasonic signals to coordinate their attacks. We disrupt that network. We cripple their whole operation. Kyle leaned in, studying the data. So how do we hit them where it hurts? We go for the jugular, Sorensen replied, zooming in on an alien structure. This is the Nexus, their central communication hub. We take it out, we cut off the head of the snake. Admiral Briggs joined them, his face haggard. Better move fast. We just got intel from our deep space probes. The Norcadians are massing near Earth, Proxima Centauri, all our key systems. Conservative estimates put their numbers at 10 to 1. Jesus, Kyle muttered. We need to buy some time. Briggs nodded. Agreed. I'm authorizing a preemptive strike on their staging grounds. Use our new stealth tech, hit 'em hard and fast. Hours later, Kyle crouched in the cockpit of a cloaked assault craft, leading a squadron of UEDF's finest toward the Norcadian fleet. His hands tightened on the controls as the alien armada came into view, a sea of biomechanical monstrosity stretching as far as the eye could see. All units, weapons hot, Kyle growled into his comm. On my mark, fire! A storm of human firepower erupted from empty space, catching the Norcadians completely off guard. Plasma torpedoes and railgun slugs tore through their ships, igniting chain reactions of destruction. But the aliens recovered quickly. Swarms of dart-like fighters poured from their carrier vessels, filling space with deadly crossfire. Kyle's squad scattered, jinking and weaving through the melee. Bravo team, hit that command ship! Kyle shouted, barrel rolling to avoid a plasma blast that would have vaporized his craft. He lined up a shot on a Norcadian cruiser and let loose a salvo of missiles, watching with grim satisfaction as they found their mark. The battle raged for hours, a frenzied dance of death among the stars. When it was over, the void was littered with the broken husks of ships from both sides. Kyle's voice was hoarse as he called for a status report. They'd bloodied the Norcadians' nose, destroying key elements of their invasion force, but at a terrible cost. As the battered human fleet limped home, Dr. Sorensen and her team raced against time. In a hardened lab deep beneath the lunar surface, they toiled to perfect their secret weapon. We're calling it the Sonic Disruptor, Sorensen explained to Kyle, holding up a sleek device. It emits a targeted blast of high-frequency waves, should jam their comms and scramble their brains. Kyle nodded grimly. Let's hope it works. We ship out for the Norcadian homeworld at 0600. The assault on the alien planet was a nightmare Kyle would never forget. His team fought tooth and nail through pulsating organic corridors, facing monstrosities that defied description. The sonic disruptors proved their worth, leaving packs of disoriented Norcadians easy prey for human firepower. Finally, they reached the heart of the Nexus, a vast chamber filled with writhing tendrils of light and pulsing, fleshy circuitry. Kyle's team worked quickly, planting demolition charges at key structural points. All right, people, let's blow this pop stand and... Kyle's order was cut short as a bone-chilling roar echoed through the chamber. A massive shape emerged from the shadows, dwarfing even the largest Norcadian they'd encountered. Its eyes gleamed with cold intelligence as it regarded the humans. So, it rumbled in perfect English, the prey comes willingly into the den of the predator. Kyle raised his weapon, but the creature was faster than seemed possible for its size. With a flick of its tail, it sent the humans sprawling. Your pitiful species has been a fascinating study, the apex Norcadian continued. We have learned much from you, adapted, evolved. Now you face a choice, kneel or be exterminated. Kyle spat blood and staggered to his feet. How about option C? He snarled, raising his hand to reveal the detonator. Go to hell! He slammed the button home. The world erupted in fire and thunder as the charges detonated, bringing tons of alien architecture down around them. Kyle and his team ran for their lives, the Apex's roar of fury chasing them through collapsing corridors. They barely made it to their extraction point, piling into the dropship as the Nexus imploded behind them. As they broke atmosphere, Kyle looked back at the burning planet below. They dealt the Norcadians a crippling blow, but at what cost? And what horrors still lurked in the dark between the stars, waiting for their chance at revenge? Kyle's boots hit the deck of the UEDF flagship with a dull thud. The taste of victory was still fresh, but a gnawing unease churned in his gut. He'd seen the look in that apex Norcadian's eyes. This wasn't over. His fears proved all too real. Within days, emergency transmissions flooded in from across human space. The sonic disruptors, their ace in the hole, fizzled uselessly against the new Norcadian onslaught. "They've adapted," Dr. Sorensen said, her face pale as she pored over the data. "The Apex must have re-engineered their entire communication system." Kyle smacked his palm on the briefing room table. "Damn it! We hit them with everything we had. How the hell are they still coming?" Admiral Briggs's weathered face appeared on the hollow display, his voice grim. "It's worse than we thought. New London, Proxima 3, Tau Ceti, all gone. Millions dead. We're pulling back to Final Bastion. It's our last shot." The next weeks were a blur of desperation as humanity's remaining forces dug in. Kyle worked around the clock with Sorensen, searching for any weakness they could exploit. "Look at this," Sorensen said one night, pulling up a holographic model of Norcadian DNA. "Their ability to evolve so rapidly, it's not natural. There has to be some kind of artificial repository, allowing the Apex to access and implement traits from their entire evolutionary history." Kyle leaned in, hope kindling. "If we take that out, we could cripple their entire species," Sorensen finished. It was a long shot, but it was all they had. Kyle handpicked his team, grizzled veterans who'd survived the worst the Norcadians could throw at them. They'd need every ounce of that experience for what came next. Using salvaged Norcadian tech, they slipped past the homeworld's orbital defenses. Kyle's palm was slick with sweat as he gripped his rifle, leading the infiltration team through pulsing organic corridors. The stench of alien biomatter filled his nostrils as they crept deeper into the planet's core. Suddenly, a bone-chilling roar echoed through the chamber. Kyle's blood ran cold. He knew that sound. The Apex burst from the shadows, flanked by a phalanx of elite warriors. Their chitinous armor gleamed in the dim light, razor-sharp claws extended. "Did you think you could hide from me in my own domain?" The Apex's voice boomed. "Your pathetic species ends here." All hell broke loose. Plasma fire and alien shrieks filled the air as Kyle's team fought for their lives. But the Norcadians were relentless, their evolving bodies shrugging off wounds that should have been fatal. "Kyle!" Sorensen shouted over the din. "The repository! It's just ahead. We have to—" Her words cut off in a gurgle as a Norcadian claw punched through her chest. Kyle screamed in fury, emptying his clip into the beast's face. "Go!" Sorensen gasped, her life ebbing away. "Finish it!" Kyle and his remaining men fought their way forward, leaving a trail of blood, both human and alien. They reached the pulsing core of the repository, the genetic legacy of an entire species laid bare before them. The Apex's roar of fury shook the chamber as Kyle armed the nuke. There was no time for goodbyes or dramatic speeches. He slammed the detonator home and the world turned to fire. The blast flung Kyle and his team clear of the disintegrating planet. As their battered shuttle limped back to Final Bastion, Kyle stared out at the stars. They'd won, but the cost. God, the cost. Word spread quickly. Without the Apex and their precious repository, the remaining Norcadians floundered. The UEDF seized the moment, unleashing a bioweapon born from Sorensen's final research. Kyle watched from the bridge as the virus tore through the alien fleet, leaving only drifting hulks in its wake. Humanity had endured, but the scars of this war would never truly heal. As the fires of battle faded, Kyle found himself standing before a memorial wall. His fingers traced the names of fallen comrades, lingering on Sorensen's. They'd saved humanity. But at what price? The real work, rebuilding, healing, was only just beginning. Kyle Johnson stood before a class of fresh-faced cadets, his weathered hands gripping the edges of the podium. The scars on his face told a story of sacrifice and survival, but his eyes burned with an intensity that made even the most restless students sit up straight. "The galaxy isn't done with us yet," he said, his voice carrying to the back of the lecture hall. "We may have beaten the Norcadians, but there are horrors out there that would make your blood run cold." A hand shot up. It belonged to Max Grayson, a lanky cadet with a mop of unruly hair and eyes that gleamed with barely contained enthusiasm. "Sir, is it true you single-handedly took down an entire Norcadian battlecruiser?" Kyle allowed himself a small smile. "The stories tend to grow in the telling, cadet. It was a team effort, always is." The familiar chime of his comm unit cut through the air. Kyle's brow furrowed as he recognized the emergency frequency. "Class dismissed," he barked, striding out of the room. Admiral Briggs' holographic form flickered to life in Kyle's office. The years hadn't been kind to the old warhorse. His face was more lined than ever, his eyes sunken with exhaustion. "Kyle, we've got a situation," Briggs said without preamble. "The Hyperion, one of our deep space explorers, has gone dark in the Krylos sector." Kyle felt his stomach clench. "Krylos? That's old Norcadian territory." Briggs nodded grimly. "Exactly. I need you to put together a team and find out what happened. If there's even a chance—" "I'm on it, sir," Kyle said, his mind already racing through potential squad compositions. Within hours, Kyle had assembled his team. Veterans of the Norcadian War stood shoulder to shoulder with the most promising cadets from the academy. Among them was Max Grayson, practically vibrating with nervous energy. Their ship, the UEDF Valkyrie, sliced through the inky void of space. Kyle paced the bridge, studying star charts and sensor readings. The Krylos sector loomed ahead, a vast expanse of unexplored systems. "Contact!" the sensor officer shouted. "We've found the Hyperion!" Kyle leaned over the view screen, his heart sinking. The exploration vessel drifted lifelessly, massive gashes torn in its hull. It looked as if some colossal beast had used it as a chew toy. "Prep a boarding team," Kyle ordered. "Full combat loadout." The interior of the Hyperion was an abattoir. Kyle's boots squelched in congealed blood as he led his team through twisted corridors. Emergency lighting cast everything in a hellish red glow. "What could have done this?" Grayson whispered, his face pale. Kyle's reply died in his throat as a faint ping echoed from his handheld scanner. "We've got a signal. Faint, but it's there, coming from— that can't be right." The coordinates led to an uncharted planet, a sickly green orb hanging in the void. As they approached, Kyle felt a chill run down his spine. Something was very, very wrong here. A small recon team, Kyle at its head, touched down on the planet's surface. The air was thick and fetid, reeking of decay. Twisted vegetation crunched underfoot as they advanced, weapons at the ready. A sound like 1,000 nails on a chalkboard split the air. Kyle whirled, his rifle snapping up. What he saw made his blood run cold. It was unmistakably Norcadian in origin, but warped beyond recognition. Twice the size of its ancestors, with bulging muscles and slavering jaws filled with razor-sharp teeth. Its eyes were filled with nothing but mindless hunger. "Ravagers," Kyle breathed, the name coming to him unbidden. The creature let out a bone-chilling shriek and charged. Kyle's team opened fire, plasma bolts searing the air. But where one fell, 2 more took its place. They poured from the twisted landscape in an endless tide of snapping jaws and rending claws. "Fall back!" Kyle roared, laying down covering fire as his team retreated. Agonized screams filled the air as soldiers were dragged down, torn apart by the ravenous horde. They barely made it back to the ship, the Ravagers howling in fury as their prey escaped. Kyle slumped against a bulkhead, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "We can't let these things spread," he said, his voice hoarse. "We have to end this, now." The plan was insane, born of desperation. They would use the Valkyrie's engines to destabilize the planet's core, turning the entire world into a funeral pyre for the Ravagers. Kyle led the strike team himself, fighting their way through waves of howling monstrosities to reach the designated impact site. The Ravagers seemed endless, their hunger insatiable. They were so close, the charges almost in place, when disaster struck. A Ravager twice the size of the others burst from the ground, scattering the team. Kyle watched in horror as it bore down on Grayson, jaws gaping wide. "Go!" Grayson shouted, his finger on the detonator. "I'll buy you time." Kyle hesitated for a heartbeat, torn between duty and the desire to save his student. But there was no time. With a roar of anguish, he turned and ran, Grayson's screams echoing in his ears as the charges detonated prematurely. The planet shuddered beneath their feet as Kyle and the survivors clawed their way back to the extraction point. They barely made it off-world as the crust began to crack, rivers of magma boiling to the surface. From orbit, they watched the world tear itself apart, taking the Ravager threat with it. But the victory felt hollow. Kyle stared at the disintegrating planet, Grayson's final moments replaying in his mind. Back on Earth, the survivors of the Krillus mission stood at rigid attention as Admiral Briggs pinned the UEDF's highest honor to an empty dress uniform. Cadet Max Grayson's name would live forever in the annals of human history. Later, alone in his quarters, Kyle poured himself a drink with shaking hands. The Norcadians were gone, but the Ravagers had proven the galaxy still held nightmares beyond imagining. He knew then that his work was far from finished. Kyle raised his glass in a silent toast. To the fallen, to the survivors, and to the battles yet to come. Whatever horrors lurked in the dark between the stars, humanity would be ready. Kyle Johnson's comm unit chirped, jolting him from a fitful sleep. The years had etched new lines on his face, but his eyes still held the sharp focus of a veteran warrior. He glanced at the display and felt his stomach tighten. Admiral Briggs never called at this hour unless something was very wrong. "Johnson here," he said, his voice rough with sleep. Briggs's weathered face appeared on the screen. "Kyle, we've got a situation. I need you in my office ASAP." 30 minutes later, Kyle stood before a holographic display of deep space, his pupils dilating from what he saw. A massive Norcadian warship, its hull scarred but intact, drifted through the inky void. "How is this possible?" Kyle asked, his fingers tracing the outline of the alien vessel. "We destroyed their fleet." Briggs shook his head. "Apparently not all of it. This ship's been adrift for years, possibly since the war. We need to know if it's a threat." Kyle nodded, already mentally assembling his team. "I'll take care of it, sir." The UEDF Valkyrie 2 cut through space, carrying Kyle's hand-picked crew. Grizzled veterans like Sarah Chen and Marcus Ortiz stood ready, their bodies bearing the scars of countless battles. Alongside them, fresh-faced officers like Lieutenant Zara Hassan watched the approaching Norcadian ship with a mix of fear and excitement. "Holy shit," Ortiz breathed as they drew near. "That thing's bigger than I remember." The alien vessel loomed before them, its once fearsome weapons now cold and silent. Kyle led the boarding party, his boots clanging against the metal deck as they entered through a breach in the hull. Emergency lights flickered to life, bathing the corridors in an eerie red glow. The air was stale, filled with the musty scent of long-abandoned machinery. "Stay sharp," Kyle ordered, his rifle sweeping the shadows. "This isn't right. Where are the bodies?" They pressed deeper into the ship, tension mounting with each step. It wasn't until they reached the central chamber that they found their answer. Row upon row of stasis pods filled the vast space, each containing a Norcadian warrior frozen in time. Kyle's blood ran cold as he realized the implications. "It's a sleeper ship," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They were going to—" A piercing alarm cut through the air. The pods began to hiss, their seals breaking as emergency systems engaged. "We triggered something!" Hassan shouted, her eyes wide with panic. Kyle's mind raced. "Back to the shuttle, now!" They ran, the sound of shattering pods echoing behind them. Disoriented Norcadian warriors stumbled from their centuries-long slumber, their predatory instincts quickly reasserting themselves. "Hold the line!" Kyle bellowed as they reached a bottleneck. His team unleashed a barrage of plasma fire, cutting down the first wave of attackers. But more kept coming. Kyle knew they couldn't hold out forever. Chen, Ortiz, get everyone to the extraction point. I'm going for the bridge. You're insane, Chen protested. You'll never make it alone. Kyle managed a grim smile. Then I guess you'd better watch my back. They fought their way through twisting corridors, every step a battle. Kyle's muscles screamed with exertion as he fired, reloaded, and fired again. Finally, they reached the bridge. Kyle's fingers flew over the alien controls, deciphering their purpose through sheer force of will. No, he breathed as the ship's navigation data appeared before him. They were headed for Earth. Chen cursed, "We can't let this thing reach populated space." Kyle nodded, his mind focused. "Initiate self-destruct. We're blowing this abomination to hell." The countdown began, a harsh klaxon adding to the chaos. Kyle and his team fought their way back through the awakening horde, every second precious. They reached the shuttle bay with mere minutes to spare. Kyle shoved the last of his team inside, turning to provide covering fire as the engines roared to life. The Valkyrie 2 accelerated away from the doomed Norcadian ship. Through the viewport, Kyle watched as a blinding explosion tore the ancient vessel apart, taking its deadly cargo with it. Back on Earth, the debriefing was grim. The threat they thought vanquished still lurked in the dark corners of the galaxy, waiting to strike. Admiral Briggs's voice was heavy as he addressed the assembled officers. "We can't let this happen again. Johnson, I'm promoting you to Admiral. Your mission: form an elite unit to hunt down any remaining Norcadian threats." Kyle stood tall, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won experience. "We'll call them the Vanguard Rangers, and we won't rest until every last Norcadian ship is found and destroyed." As he gazed out at the faces of his new command, Kyle felt the familiar fire of purpose burning in his chest. The war wasn't over, but this time, humanity would be ready. Admiral Kyle Johnson stood on the bridge of the UEDF Valkyrie 2, his eyes scanning the endless expanse of stars. The years had added streaks of gray to his hair, but his gaze remained sharp and focused. The routine patrol mission near Cernian space felt anything but routine. "Admiral, we're receiving a distress call," Lieutenant Zara Hassan reported, her voice taut with concern. "It's from the Cernian outpost on Epsilon 9. They've lost all communication with their base." Kyle's muscles tensed. Play it. A garbled transmission filled the bridge, punctuated by static. "Under attack! Defenses breached. Norcadian, help us." "Set course for Epsilon 9, maximum speed," Kyle ordered, his mind racing through combat scenarios. "All hands to battle stations." The Valkyrie 2 cut through space, its engines thrumming with power. Kyle briefed his team, seasoned rangers ready for anything, or so they thought. As they approached Epsilon 9, an unsettling quiet greeted them. No debris field, no signs of battle. Just a small gray moon hanging in space, the outpost a barely visible speck on its surface. "No response to hails," Hassan reported, her brow furrowed. "Prep a landing team," Kyle said, strapping on his combat gear. "Full loadout. We go in hot." The shuttle touched down on Epsilon 9's airless surface. Kyle led his team towards the outpost's airlock, weapons at the ready. The silence was oppressive, broken only by their labored breathing inside their helmets. They cycled through the airlock, the outpost's artificial gravity taking hold. Kyle's boots hit the metal floor with a dull thud. Emergency lighting bathed the corridor in a sickly red glow. "Fan out," Kyle whispered into his comm. "Stay alert." They moved through empty corridors, past abandoned workstations. No signs of struggle, no blast marks. Just emptiness. Until they reached the main control room. The sight hit Kyle like a physical blow. Bodies lay strewn across the floor, Cernian features twisted in expressions of pure agony. Their eyes, all of them, stared sightlessly upward, filled with a terror that lingered even in death. "What the hell happened here?" Sergeant Ortiz breathed, his voice barely audible. Kyle forced himself to focus. "Hassan, Chen, start gathering data. Ortiz, Reynolds, secure the perimeter. Dr. Alvarez, I need answers." The team's chief medical officer knelt beside one of the bodies, her scanner humming. "This is impossible," she muttered. "Talk to me, Doc," Kyle pressed. "These readings, there's traces of some kind of radiation I've never seen before. It's as if—" She hesitated, struggling for words. "It's as if something drained the very life force from their bodies." A chill ran down Kyle's spine. This was no Norcadian attack. Suddenly, a piercing shriek tore through Kyle's mind. He staggered, clutching his head as wave after wave of psychic agony washed over him. Around him, his team collapsed to their knees, faces contorted in pain. Through the haze of torment, a realization crystallized in Kyle's mind. This was no external attack. This came from within, from the Cernians themselves. As quickly as it began, the psychic assault ended. Kyle struggled to his feet, his ears ringing. "Everyone okay?" he called out, his voice hoarse. Groans and shaky affirmatives answered him. "Sir," Hassan said, her face pale, "I managed to access some of the outpost's logs before that happened. You need to see this." Kyle leaned over her console, his blood running cold as he read the fragmented reports. A rogue faction of Cernians, embracing forbidden psychic techniques, experiments in mental domination, plans for galactic conquest. "Mind-breakers," Kyle whispered, the name coming unbidden to his lips. He straightened, addressing his team with grim dedication. "We're pulling out, now. We need to warn the Cernian High Council before it's too late." As they raced back to their shuttle, Kyle's mind raced. The Norcadians had been a nightmare, but this was something far worse. A threat that could unravel the very fabric of civilized space. The Valkyrie 2 blasted away from Epsilon 9, leaving the grim testament to the Mindbreaker's power behind. Kyle knew the real battle was just beginning, a race against time, with the fate of the stars hanging in the balance. Kyle's heart pounded as he stood on the bridge of the UEDF Valkyrie 2, watching the Cernian homeworld grow larger on the screen. The victory against the Mindbreakers had been hard won, but a sense of unease gnawed at him. Suddenly, the ship's sensors blared to life. Lieutenant Hassan's fingers flew across her console. "Admiral, I'm detecting massive energy fluctuations across the planet's surface." Kyle leaned forward, his eyes widening as he saw entire cities begin to crumble and decay before their eyes. The comms crackled with panicked screams and pleas for help. "What the hell is happening down there?" Sergeant Ortiz growled. Before Kyle could respond, a wave of psychic energy slammed into the ship. Crew members cried out, clutching their heads. Kyle gritted his teeth against the assault, his vision blurring. It's awake," a Cernian scientist gasped, blood trickling from his nose. "The Ancient One, we failed to contain it." Kyle watched in horror as the remnants of the Mindbreaker forces on the planet's surface began to move with eerie synchronicity, their bodies jerking like puppets on invisible strings. "We need to regroup," Kyle ordered, his voice tight with pain. "Get us out of range of that psychic attack." As the Valkyrie 2 retreated to a safe distance, Kyle gathered his team and their Cernian allies in the war room. The holographic display showed a planet in chaos, its population reduced to mindless husks. "Our worst fears have come to pass," the Cernian High Counselor said, his voice heavy with grief. "The entity we sought to prevent from awakening has stirred." Kyle leaned over the tactical display. "We need a plan, and fast. This thing isn't going to stop with your world." Hours of frantic planning and intelligence gathering followed. Finally, a captured Mindbreaker revealed the key, a physical nexus hidden in a subspace rift. "The Maelstrom," Hassan whispered, her face pale as she studied the star charts. "It's a region of space that's torn reality itself. Ships that enter rarely return." Kyle stood, his eyes sharp. "Then that's where we're going. Assemble a strike team. We end this now." The journey into the Maelstrom pushed their ships and their sanity to the breaking point. Reality itself seemed to twist and warp around them. Strange, tentacled horrors materialized out of the void. their very presence assaulting the minds of the crew. Kyle watched as one of his rangers, a veteran of a dozen campaigns, curled into a fetal position, screaming about eyes in the dark. He forced himself to look away, focusing on the task at hand. Finally, they emerged into a pocket of calm space. Before them loomed a structure that defied description, a writhing mass of energy that pulsed with malevolent purpose. "That's it," the Cernian psychic next to Kyle said, his voice filled with awe and terror. "The Nexus!" Kyle keyed his comm. "All ships, prepare for breach. Cernian psychers, channel everything you've got into creating an opening." The air crackled with psychic energy as the Cernian warriors pooled their power. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like reality itself tearing, a gap appeared in the Nexus's defenses. "Now!" Kyle shouted, leading the charge into the breach. Inside, chaos reigned. Mindbreaker troops, their eyes glowing with unnatural light, swarmed towards them. Kyle's team fought with desperate intensity, knowing that failure meant the end of everything. They pushed deeper into the structure, the very air seeming to vibrate with malevolent energy. And then, in the heart of the Nexus, they saw it. The Avatar stood before them, a grotesque fusion of Cernian and alien flesh. Its eyes blazed with the power of a god, and when it spoke, reality itself trembled. "Insignificant motes," it boomed. "You dare challenge that which is beyond your comprehension?" Kyle raised his weapon, unleashing a torrent of fire. His team followed suit, throwing everything they had at the monstrosity, but their most powerful weapons seemed to barely scratch its surface. As the battle raged, Kyle's mind raced. They were outmatched, outgunned, and then, in a moment of clarity, he saw the answer. "Hassan!" he shouted over the din of battle. "The ships! Set them to overload and ram the Nexus!" Understanding dawned in her eyes. She nodded, her fingers flying over her comm unit as she relayed the orders. The Avatar roared, sensing their plan. It lashed out with tendrils of pure psychic force, decimating Kyle's team. But they had bought the precious seconds needed. "Fall back," Kyle ordered, dragging wounded comrades towards the closing rift. They tumbled through just as the subspace tear sealed shut behind them. Through the view screen, Kyle watched as the UEDF ships plowed into the Nexus, their reactors going critical. The explosion that followed defied description. Even from a great distance, the psychic backlash knocked them all unconscious. When Kyle came to, the maelstrom was gone. In its place was empty space, the entity and its Nexus obliterated by the cataclysmic blast. Exhausted but victorious, they limped back to Cernian space. The cost had been devastating. Entire cities lay in ruins, their populations decimated, but a flicker of hope remained. As Kyle stood on the bridge, watching repair efforts begin on the ravaged Cernian worlds, he felt the weight of all they had endured, the threats they had faced, the lives lost. But he also felt a fierce pride in what they had accomplished. Human and Cernian worked side by side, rebuilding what was lost. Kyle knew the road ahead would be hard, but looking at the commitment in the eyes of those around him, he also knew they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together. Kyle's boots scraped against the scorched metal floor as he staggered through the battle station's reactor core. Blood trickled from a gash above his eye, blurring his vision. The acrid stench of burnt circuitry and ozone filled his nostrils. Behind him lay the broken form of the apex Norcadian, its cybernetic limbs twitching uselessly. Warning klaxons blared. Red emergency lights cast an eerie glow over the destruction. Kyle stumbled, catching himself on a twisted support beam. His fingers found the evacuation panel, leaving smears of blood as he punched in the code. "All personnel evacuate immediately," the computerized voice echoed through the station. "Reactor core destabilizing. 5 minutes to critical mass." Kyle slumped against the wall, his strength ebbing. He tapped his communicator. "Sarah, get them out. It's done." Outside, Sarah's eyes widened as she watched the battle station through the view screen of her shuttle. Escape pods streaked away from the dying structure. Admiral Kyle, we need to go, she shouted into her comm. Static answered her. Kyle! The station's hull buckled. Cracks of searing light erupted along its surface. Sarah's hands tightened on the controls as the shock wave hit, rattling the small craft. No, she whispered. The explosion bloomed, silent and terrible in the vacuum of space. Chunks of debris peppered the barren planetoid below, kicking up plumes of gray dust. Sarah blinked back tears, her teeth clenched. She keyed the ship-wide comm. This is Commander Sarah. All units, form up. We're going home. The journey back to Earth stretched into weeks. Sarah spent hours staring at star charts, her mind replaying the cost of their victory. The Norcadians' path of destruction was etched across the galaxy. Whole star systems reduced to lifeless husks. When they finally reached Earth, a somber mood hung over the spaceport. Admiral Briggs waited on the landing pad, his lined face grave. Sarah saluted, her uniform crisp despite the weariness in her eyes. At ease, Admiral, Briggs said softly. Walk with me. They strode through silent corridors. Briggs spoke of the end of the war, of Kyle's sacrifice. Sarah listened, numb. The Vanguard Rangers need a leader, Briggs said at last. Someone who understands what we've faced and what we might face in the future. Sarah straightened. Sir, Briggs held up a hand. It's already done. Congratulations, Admiral Sarah. The years that followed tested Sarah's purpose. She stood on broken worlds, watching terraforming machines labor to restore ruined atmospheres. She spoke with survivors, their haunted eyes telling stories no words could capture. On a newly liberated colony, Sarah crouched beside a young girl. The child's arm ended in a crude prosthetic, a remnant of Norcadian experiments. What's your name? Sarah asked gently. Mira, the girl whispered. Sarah smiled. That's a beautiful name, Mira. Would you like to see something amazing? She led Mira to a cleared patch of soil where her team had been working. Tiny green shoots poked through the earth, the first plants to grow on this world in a decade. Mira's eyes widened. It's alive? Yes, Sarah said. And one day this whole planet will be alive again, just like you. But even as hope took root, Sarah couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. Reports trickled in from the fringes of known space. Disturbing readings, garbled transmissions, whispers of something stirring in the dark between stars. Sarah pored over the data, a chill creeping down her spine. Whatever this new threat was, it made the Norcadians look like children playing at war. In the academy halls, Sarah watched the next generation of Rangers train. Their faces were so young, so eager. She thought of Kyle, of all they had sacrificed to reach this moment of peace. Listen up, cadets, she barked. The young recruits snapped to attention. You're here because humanity needs you. The galaxy needs you. We've faced monsters before, and we'll face them again. But remember this, we are not prey. We are the guardians of life itself, and we will never ever give up. As twilight fell over the rebuilt skyline of Earth's capital, Sarah stood on a balcony. The first stars winked into view above. She took a deep breath, savoring the clean air, a luxury so many worlds had lost. A cadet approached, datapad in hand. Admiral, we've detected an anomaly in the outer rim. You asked to be notified immediately of any... Sarah nodded, her eyes still fixed on the stars. Thank you, cadet. Gather the senior staff. It's time to get to work.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. And for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.